I want to start this video by sharing with you something that very few people have seen, something which I tend to be very private about. I think a lot of people tend to be very private about, and that is my YouTube feed, meaning that is the page that YouTube presents me with whenever I visit the site. And on this page are YouTube videos that YouTube is recommending, things that I will enjoy. And indeed, when I look at this page, when I see these videos, I see a lot of videos that I would enjoy. So many choices, so many directions I can take my mind, I can look, I can learn, engaging the different aspects of my life and my hobbies and my brain. And what we have here is almost like a mirror of Erised. The mirror of Erised is a mirror that comes up in Harry Potter. It's a mirror that Harry finds one night while sort of roaming the halls of Hogwarts. And in the mirror, he sees what he most deeply desires. If you're wondering why this mirror is called the mirror of Erised, the answer is because Erised is desire spelled backwards. And indeed, YouTube can feel like that mirror of Erised. It's like the algorithm knows, the platform knows what you want to see and can entice you. And when you think of modern technology more generally, not just YouTube, but social media and Facebook and Reddit and Instagram and all these things, when I think of my relationship to my phone, it's like a deep kind of mirror of Erised. It knows me. It reflects back to me what I want to see. It's not just a portal into all these things, all these paths, these directions where we can go, all these ways we can spend our time, this enticing visual stimulation that we're seeking out addictively. There's a deep element of reacting, because these algorithms, these platforms are driven by reactions. What YouTube shows me is a product of what I watch, of what I like and what I dislike, what Facebook shows me, what Reddit shows me. And so in this world of ours, this technologically interconnected world, what we react to becomes a very important form of expression. What we will see on our feeds, on our phones, on social media, will depend on how we react. There feels like this pressure, this need to react. Unplugging in the modern age, not reading about what's going on in the world, not reading about the news, feels like a moral shortcoming. Feels like shirking sort of this urgent responsibility that we have to be informed, and to be informed so we can react. Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business is a book by Neil Postman that was written in 1985, so almost 30 years ago, and it describes this sort of coming technological dystopia. The book is focused on television, the way in which television has suddenly become very ubiquitous in people's homes, but it writes about television with an understanding that television is really the harbinger of something more fundamental, of a real tectonic shift in society. And now that it's been almost 30 years since the book has come out, it's a wonderful opportunity to look back and reflect on what the book got right and what the book got wrong. To what extent do we live in Postman's technological dystopia? We are the children of his prediction. We are living in this age that he was envisioning, an age where we would be totally plugged in, totally addicted to our screens. And to what extent was he able to understand the texture of this age? So before we talk about some of the things that Postman probably got right, let's just identify a few things that Postman clearly got wrong. This book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, is part of a long history genre of many different types of books that bemoan, that catastrophize about the coming generation, the new generation with their newfangled technologies, their illiteracy, and their betrayal of the values, the cultural values that made our country great. That kind of rhetoric can be found in every generation, in every society, in countless books, and Neil Postman's book is certainly an example of that. So to give a quote from the book, which is just like Postman at his worst. Here, Postman is describing a conversation with the students about their writing.
Look here, I say. In this paragraph you have said one thing, and in that you have said the opposite. Which is it to be? They are polite, and wish to please, but they are as baffled by the question as I am by the response. I know, they will say, but that is there and this is here. The difference between us is that I assume there and here, now and then, one paragraph and the next to be connected, to be continuous, to be part of the same coherent world of thought. That is the way of typographic discourse, and typography is the universe I'm coming from, as they say. But they are coming from a different universe of discourse altogether, the now this world of television. The fundamental assumption of that world is not coherence but discontinuity. And in a world of discontinuities, contradiction is useless as a test of truth or merit, because contradiction does not exist.
Now, I find this story extremely hard to believe. I think it's extremely unlikely that Neil Postman's students don't know how to write essays anymore because they watch television, and they don't understand that essays need to make sense and be coherent. But what did Postman see coming? What is Postman so concerned about? So there's a lot of different threads that come up in Amusing Ourselves to Death. One of the threads that feels very prescient is this chapter, now this culture, this idea that we're living in a society where we need, rapid fire entertainment. The world is presented to us in smaller and smaller sound bites and smaller blurbs. The sense that if you're, sitting down to read a newspaper, you're probably open to a more nuanced, long-form discussion of current events. But if you're getting your information from the television, and of course, if you're getting your information from social media headlines, you're being fed a much more superficial, a much more visceral kind of perspective of the world. And sadly, I think Postman is totally right. I think that there's a huge difference. You can immediately tell, who are the people who get their news primarily from the television, from CNN, from CNBC, from Fox News, and people who primarily get their news from reading, namely newspapers with, reputable journalists working at those newspapers. It's just a huge, tremendous difference. Postman talks a lot about advertising and the effect of being bombarded with audio-visual advertisements all the time. And of course, this is very astute. And now more than ever, we're just bombarded by ads. And he spends a special amount of time on political ads. But there's no doubt that in our capitalist society, every corporation, every nonprofit, every GoFundMe account is trying to get something from us. It's trying to win our attention, win our clicks. And there's this bombardment of nonstop propaganda, nonstop ideologically motivated content, trying to win our attention and win our minds. And there's a real cost there. There's a real noise in our society, in our minds, in our attention because of that. A central metaphor of the book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, is the difference between George Orwell's dystopia as described in 1984 and Aldous Huxley's dystopia as described in Brave New World. So Postman writes, quote,
"But we had forgotten that alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another, slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. But in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture. This book is about the possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was right."
And this is a quote from the book's final chapter where he continues in this thread.
"There are two ways by which the spirit of a culture may be shriveled. In the first, the Orwellian, culture becomes a prison. In the second, the Huxleyan, culture becomes a burlesque. What Huxley teaches is that in the age of advanced technology, spiritual devastation is more likely to come from an enemy with a smiling face than from one whose countenance exudes suspicion and hate. In the Huxleyan prophecy, Big Brother does not watch us by his choice. We watch him by ours."
Of course, the analogy between our modern world and the dystopia described in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is a tricky one to make. I mean, Brave New World is characterized by extreme forms of central planning, child abuse, slave labor, eugenics, and things that existed in the world well before the advent of mass media, well before the advent of television. And I don't think Postman is making the argument that television has made those things worse in our society, has made slave labor more ubiquitous or eugenics more of an issue. But the analogy that he's making, which I think is compelling one is the analogy between the drug soma and television, and our screens and our smartphones. The sense that constant entertainment creates a distracted society. I think about the ways I myself am fairly addicted to checking my phone. I try to be mindful of that. I try to, set timers and see how long will it take me between the time I put my phone down and the time I check it again. And I try to keep track of those numbers. And I'm mindful of the way that my children, can get totally sucked into a screen, and how hard it can be to take away a screen from them. And there's a sense that the world has offered us, a kind of narcotic in our pocket, a kind of portal to escape our present reality and just be transported somewhere totally different. But for me, the most interesting and exciting argument that Postman makes, and the reason I was so eager to make a video about this book, is Postman's idea that television and technology has an ideological bend. It transforms our patterns of thought. It transforms the way in which we see the world and think about the world in a very fundamental way. So this is Postman, I think, at his most interesting and most prescient. Quote,
"To be unaware that a technology comes equipped with a program for social change, to maintain that technology is neutral, to make the assumption that technology is always a friend to culture is, at this late hour, stupidity plain and simple. Introduce the alphabet to a culture and you change its cognitive habits, its social relations, its notions of community, history, and religion. Introduce the printing press with movable type, and you do the same. Introduce speed of light transmission of images and you make a cultural revolution, without a vote, without polemics, without guerrilla resistance. Here is ideology, pure if not serene. Here is ideology without words, and all the more powerful for their absence. All that is required to make it stick is a population that devoutly believes in the inevitability of progress. And in this sense, all Americans are Marxists, for we believe nothing if not that history is moving us towards some preordained paradise and that technology is the force behind that movement."
I love this line that all Americans are Marxists, for we believe nothing if not that history is moving us towards some preordained paradise and that technology is the force behind that movement, end quote. And it makes me think of the fact that when I was younger, I really did buy into this technological utopianism. Technology was running. It was changing so quickly. The internet was being invented, and AOL and chat rooms and all these things. And there was this belief that we're heading into this utopian vision of ubiquitous technology, ubiquitous connection. In a chapter called Peekaboo World, Postman talks about the effect the telegraph had on our society, because for him, the television is an extension of the telegraph, and it's part of the same technological trend. And so he writes about the telegraph as follows, quote,
"To no one's surprise, it was an American who found a practical way to put electricity in the service of communication and, in doing so, eliminated the problem of space once and for all. I refer, of course, to Samuel Finley Breese Morse, America's first true spaceman. His telegraph erased state lines, collapsed regions, and, by wrapping the continent in an information grid, created the possibility of a unified American discourse, but at a considerable cost. For telegraphy did something that Morse did not foresee when he prophesied that telegraphy would make one neighborhood of the whole country. It destroyed the prevailing definition of information, and in doing so gave a new meaning to public discourse. Among the few who understood this consequence was Henry David Thoreau, who remarked in Walden that, 'We are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas, but Maine and Texas, it may be, have nothing important to communicate. We are eager to tunnel under the Atlantic and bring the old world some weeks nearer to the new. But perchance the first news that will leak through into the broad, flapping American ear will be that Princess Adelaide has the whooping cough.' Thoreau, as it turned out, was precisely correct. He grasped that the telegraph would create its own definition of discourse, that it would not only permit but insist upon a conversation between Maine and Texas, and that it would require the content of that conversation to be different from what typographic man was accustomed to."
And so what Postman is saying is that the telegraph, like technology, has not just made the world smaller, but it's changed the way we think about information. And what he means by that information is, what do we consume? What do we put out in the world? What is the unit with which we break down our thought? What is our Facebook feed look like? What are those headlines that we're ingesting into our mind, into our brain, into our thinking? And what are those tweets and posts and snippets that we're putting out into the world? And specifically, Postman is interested in the way information has become context-free. Information is something which just stands alone.
Telegraphy gave a form of legitimacy to the idea of context-free information, that is, to the idea that the value of information need not be tied to any function it might serve in social and political decision-making and action, but may attach merely to its novelty, interest, and curiosity. The telegraph made information into a commodity, a thing that could be bought and sold irrespective of its uses or meaning.
In the following quote, I feel like Postman could just as well be describing social media, Twitter and Facebook, in the way in which it makes us, on the one hand, more connected, but also more atomized, more individuated, in some sense more alone than ever before.
In a sea of information, there was very little of it to use. A man in Maine and a man in Texas could converse, but not about anything either of them knew or cared very much about. The telegraph may have made the country into one neighborhood, but it was a peculiar one, populated by strangers who knew nothing but the most superficial facts about each other.
I think we live now in this world that Postman predicted, this kind of information overload, the sense where everyone is trying to get us to react, everyone is trying to get us to respond, to click, and we're being pulled in a million different directions, some of them very admirable. Some of those directions are caring more about the ecological collapse happening around us, care more about wars happening around the world or poverty happening around the world. These are all things that are, admirable, valid things to worry about. But this constant bombardment of anxiety, of course, we're pulled in other directions. We're pulled in every political direction. We're being sold a million products simultaneously. Every ad is trying to entice us with new visual stimulus to click on. There's a sense in which we've never been more powerful. We've never had more choices. We've never had more access to information, but a sense in which we've never felt more powerless. We've never been more paralyzed by choice. Here's another description of the telegraph that I think sees deep into our current information age and seems to really brilliantly describe the way social media and the cable news cycle has warped and reimagined what the public discourse looks like.
Prior to the age of telegraphy, the information-action ratio was sufficiently close so that most people had a sense of being able to control some of the contingencies in their lives. What people knew about had action value. In the information world created by telegraphy, this sense of potency was lost, precisely because the whole world became the context for news. Everything became everyone's business. For the first time, we were sent information which answered no question we had asked, and which, in any case, did not permit the right of reply. We may say then that the contribution of the telegraph to public discourse was to dignify irrelevance and amplify impotence. But this was not all. Telegraphy also made public discourse essentially incoherent. It brought into being a world of broken time and broken attention, to use Lewis Mumford's phrase. The value of telegraphy is undermined by applying the tests of permanence, continuity, or coherence. The telegraph is suited only to the flashing of messages, each to be quickly replaced by a more up-to-date message. Facts push other facts into and then out of consciousness at speeds that neither permit nor require evaluation. Thus, to the reverent question posed by Morse, "What hath God wrought?" a disturbing answer came back. A neighborhood of strangers and pointless quantity, a world of fragments and discontinuities. Television has become, so to speak, the background radiation of the social and intellectual universe, the all but imperceptible residue of the electronic Big Bang of a century past, so familiar and so thoroughly integrated with American culture that we no longer hear its faint hissing in the background or see the flickering gray light.
So what do we do with all this? I grew up in the Orthodox Jewish world, and I was raised that one day a week, namely the Saturday, is a day off from all technology, all television, computers, etc. And I'm trying to raise my own family, my own kids, with that same tradition. I'll end with some quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh's book Silence, which is a book that deals with and explores also the way in which our minds have been scattered and our attention has been scattered by the new technological tools at our disposal, and he describes ways in which we can try to recover some of that internal silence, some of that sense of presence, of being at home with ourselves in the current moment in the modern world. Perhaps, even more than edible food, the sensory food we consume affects how we feel. We may pick up a magazine or go on the internet, looking at pictures and listening to music. We want to connect and be informed. We want to enjoy ourselves. These are fine reasons to consume sensory food, but often our real purpose in those moments is simply to run away from ourselves and cover up the suffering inside. When we listen to music, read a book, or pick up a newspaper, it's usually not because we truly need that activity or information. We often do it mechanically, perhaps because we're used to doing it, or we want to kill time and fill up the discomforting sense of empty space. We may do it to avoid encountering ourselves. Many of us are afraid of going home to ourselves because we don't know how to handle the suffering inside us. That's why we're always reaching for more and more sense impressions to consume. We are what we feel and perceive. If we are angry, we are the anger. If we are in love, we are the love. If we look at a snowy mountain peak, we are the mountain. While dreaming, we are the dream. When we stop the body, the mental chatter seems louder. When we stop the mental chatter, the constant cognitive agitation, we can experience a spaciousness that allows us a chance to live our life in a radically new and satisfying way. We can't be happy without space for silence. I know this from direct observation and experience. Without silence, we aren't living in the present moment, and this moment is our very best chance to find happiness. We spend a lot of time looking for happiness when the world right around us is full of wonder. To be alive and walk on the earth is a miracle, and yet most of us are running as if there were some better place to get to. There is beauty calling to us every day, every hour, but we are rarely in a position to listen. The basic condition for us to be able to hear the call of beauty and respond to it is silence. If we don't have silence in ourselves, in our mind, our body, if our mind, our body are full of noise, then we can't hear beauty's call. Mindfulness is often described as a bell that reminds us to stop and silently listen. We can use an actual bell or any other cue that helps us remember not to be carried away by the noise around and inside us. When we hear the bell, we stop. We follow our in-breath and our out-breath, making space for silence. We say to ourselves, breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing in and out mindfully, paying attention only to the breath, we can quiet all the noise within us, the chattering about the past, the future, and the longing for something more.